Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're powered by CLNS Radio. Today on the show, we're going to do a two-part breakdown of NBA draft and offseason previews. The first part of this episode is going to be with Greg Wissinger from over at Sacktown Royalty. He also hosts the Sacktown Royalty show, podcast. What is it called exactly? I can't remember.
Yeah, the Sacktown Royalty Show. It's okay if you forgot because I haven't done an episode in like 2 months.
Well, yeah, we're good then. Then the second guest, who I've recorded with already, is Erik Gunderson from over up in Portland, host of the Locked On Blazers podcast. Has written in the past for the Columbian, has written for AP, Real GM, bunch of different places. Really great conversation about where the Blazers are headed. Greg and I are about to record this podcast while watching the fourth quarter of the Cavs-Warriors Game 3, so we're probably just going to start yelling at random times. As usual, you should expect random cursing, random outbursts of craziness, but, listeners of this podcast, I feel like they're used to that kind of thing at this stage.
Yeah, I think you've got the savvy listeners to be able to handle us freaking out about plays they can't see.
Yeah, so, we're about to talk about the NBA draft with the Kings, and I find watching this NBA Finals through the prism of the NBA draft a little bit interesting because we see this game, we're in the third quarter there, where genuinely Kevin Durant and LeBron James were playing the five, the entire quarter, basically. Should I just, start taking all of these big men, off of my NBA draft board? Is there still a place for, true big men in the NBA?
I think Yorgos Papagiannis is going to end up being the last true big man in the NBA just because, his talent is undeniable. So, beyond that, I don't know what the point is of having big men anymore. Everyone else should just go small.
Yeah, okay, let's be real clear. I think last year I might have called that pick the worst lottery pick since I've been covering the NBA draft. Something along the lines of that. I've not seen much of Papa G to make me real excited about his future going forward in the NBA. I'm rooting for you guys, though. I hope he's successful.
If I can take us on a quick detour here, I actually, I was very down on the pick as well, and I tend to be able to talk myself into pretty much anything the Kings do, because that's just a defense and coping mechanism I've developed. But, I really was down on that pick, especially the early footage we saw when he was playing in their G League affiliate in Reno. He was just bad. But towards the end of the season, some garbage time, especially after the Cousins trade when they didn't have quite the big man depth. He put in a few solid minutes and had a couple games where he showed flashes where you're like, yeah, he's still not good. He's still far from what you would call NBA ready, but there's at least some glimmer of why they maybe thought he was good. I still don't know if it was the best value at 13, but it is what it is, and I don't think in the end he'll end up being a complete bust.
I'm rooting for you, man. It's about all I got to say on that one.
Kings fans, we're just doing what we like to call the Isaiah Thomas rule, where you pretend the good player that you got much later in the draft was the early pick, and then the other guy was later in the pick. So we did that with Isaiah and Jimmer. Now we're going to do it with Papagiannis and Scalabrine. We're just swapping them in our minds.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's set the table on the Sacramento Kings here last season. 32-50. Offensive rating, 107.3. Defensive rating, 111.3. Basically in line with what an expected win-loss percentage would be given those offensive and defensive ratings and net rating. This was the tale of two seasons, obviously, the pre-DeMarcus Cousins trade and the post-DeMarcus Cousins trade. I guess, what was your feeling when that went down? How were you disappointed? Were you, angry at what they got back? Were you happy with what they got back? What was just your overall thought process when that whole thing happened? And then we'll get into, being excited about, what happened later in the season, because I think there actually was some room for growth there.
Absolutely. And when the trade went down, more than anything, I was just shocked that they had actually pulled the trigger on it. I mean, when the designated player extension, or I forget what it's called, that would have allowed the Kings to give DeMarcus Cousins way more than anyone else could have in free agency, it seemed like they were locked to keep him because suddenly they had the upper hand on retaining him. They could pay him, and everything the front office ever said was that they weren't shopping him, they weren't going to get rid of him, they were going to keep him and build around him. And suddenly they pulled the trigger and changed course, something that had been rumored for years. And yeah, in the immediate aftermath, I was kind of disappointed that the Kings didn't get back more. But realistically, I mean, fans are always going to want more back in a trade than what you actually end up getting, regardless of who the trade is for. And yeah, I mean, I was disappointed. I was a little upset. But at the same time, it was hard to get terribly upset at something that obviously they'd put a lot of time, a lot of different teams around DeMarcus Cousins, and we can talk about how poorly those teams were built over the years, but it wasn't working. They reset, and good on them for doing an honest reset and then letting the chips fall where they may.
Were you okay with what they got back?
In the moment, not so much. Since then, I'm much better with it. Mostly just because, and this is kind of a weird fuzzy math thing to approach it as, but realistically, if the Kings had kept Cousins, they probably, the way they were playing, the way their season was going, they probably would have lost their top 10 protected pick, which was going to go to Chicago, originally owed to Cleveland from the J.J. Hickson-Omri Caspi trade like 6 years ago.
That is the most depressing thing in the world, that pick never transferred.
Well, yes and no. Because, hey, they kept their pick, and so even though the Kings
generally though, like the fact that like it took 6 years, they had 6 years to transfer that pick and get out of the top 14.
Yeah,
that's just depressing.
I still remember exactly what we wrote at Sacktown Royalty when that trade went down. Tom Ziller, who was still running STR at the time, he was analyzing the trade and saying, on the one side, if the trade helps propel the Kings to good things, we'll be okay with giving up that pick, and God forbid somehow we don't convey it in 6 years. It was just like this unthinkable thing that the Kings could stay that bad that long.
It's bad, man.
But because of that trade, in a sense, by trading away Cousins and being worse down the stretch, even though the Kings still were playing decently competitive basketball for what they had, it basically kept them an extra first-round pick in this year's draft, which is expected to be very good. And thanks to some lottery luck and the unfortunate side effects of some pick swaps, ended up being the 5th overall pick.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, like all of the pick swap stuff, that ridiculous trade with Philadelphia, that was bad, but it's a sunk cost at this stage.
Yeah.
Like, it is what it is. Like, we don't need to rehash that. It was dumb and it happened, period.
I would rather end up with the 5th pick in this draft, as opposed to the 3rd because of some pick swaps, as opposed to having conveyed that pick to Chicago and not having a first rounder in this draft.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So let's talk about kind of down the stretch here, I guess, because that's a lot more exciting to me.
Yeah.
Like, they actually played fun basketball. They played this up-tempo style that it seems like Vivek has wanted to play for a long time. Finally got into this crazy up and down, spacing oriented, like Golden State Warriors-esque with big guys style. And that was fun. Like, they had a lot of really young players. Buddy Hield looked really good. Willie Cauley-Stein showed signs of life for the first time in 2.5 years. Scalabissiere was really fun. Would you rather have this, or would you rather have DeMarcus Cousins, I guess? Like, what is your feeling on the way that this is?
Well, and first off, just to kind of show how painfully long and drawn out some of the Kings' failings have been, this was just Cauley-Stein's 2nd season.
Was it really?
Yeah,
it was 3, right?
No. This was his sophomore year. That's how long and drawn out Kings years seem.
Yeah, it is. Oh my God, yeah, it is, because he was on the team with Karl Towns.
Yeah. So,
that's incredible to me.
Yeah. So at the time, like before the trade, because I mean, this was something that was endlessly debated around our forums, and I was always on board with, the purpose of tanking is you're trying to get a star to build around. We have a star to build around. Why do you want to reset that and go tank? But having seen the way Kings basketball looked in the aftermath of the trade, seeing what we had in Skal Labissiere, what we had in Buddy Hield, Willie Cauley-Stein, some of the other young guys on the roster, like, that's exciting. That gives you some hope that you can build around. And yeah, you're going to be worse in the short run, but it feels like there could at least be hope for a higher ceiling than the perpetual 28 to 33 wins they had with DeMarcus Cousins. And as much as I still believe in DeMarcus Cousins' talent, and I think he gets a bad rap because of the years he has had wasted in Sacramento by front offices and coaches and his own actions as well, it's nice just not to have that shadow of that debate of, how are we building? Are we going to go around Cousins, not have to defend his bad habits?
Right.
You mentioned the pace. I mean, there's 5 guys running down the floor instead of 4 and DeMarcus trailing.
Yeah.
I mean, and even when DeMarcus was giving good effort, he's just not a fast guy. He just doesn't move down the court that quick. Because,
transition defense is always a problem with him.
He's a big guy. He has some foot issues. He can't move that quick, So it was a lot more fun rooting for the Kings after the trade, which took me by surprise. I did not think it would be that much fun.
So let's kind of talk about who we consider to be the core of this rebuilding team now. Like, obviously, Buddy Hield is, I guess he's the centerpiece now. Probably not after this NBA draft, but like, Buddy is definitely the centerpiece of what they currently have on the roster, and was really good whenever they acquired him. He was 15 points, 4 rebounds, I think like 2 assists a game. Shot really, really well from 3, was relatively efficient from inside 2-point range. Like, there was actually a lot to like about what we saw from Buddy Hield. Like, he looked way better than what he looked like in New Orleans. And I know that, like, March and April for teams that are out of the playoff race is essentially fake basketball, but like, it was still encouraging.
Absolutely. And I was a big fan of his in the draft, and I was hoping he'd fall to the Kings. And then he went to the Pelicans, and I kind of soured on him a little bit because, like I said, he wasn't setting the world on fire, even though the Pelicans could have used that. And so when they traded him to Sacramento, I was a little hesitant to just get fully on board, even though I'd liked him in the draft. But he played much better in Sacramento. The shooting was great. He had a great shot, looked very comfortable, especially for a rookie. And one of the other big things, I mean, his handle looked a lot better in games than what we'd been led to believe his handle could be.
Yeah, he's someone who can actually like create shots with a step back dribble. Like he's always like, or at least as of his senior year in college, because that was like a massive improvement from him from his junior year to his senior year. Like, he can actually kind of do some stuff with the ball, creating going backwards. Going forward is another question, right? Like, is he going to be able to get to the rim, like, creating and getting downhill in the pick and roll? Probably not. But like, if he can attack closeouts and, get into the mid range and get to the rim on an attack on a closeout, like if he can, take a pick and roll and, go around a screen, right to left dribble, step back jumper, like that actually creates a lot of utility. And I think that he can actually do that kind of stuff. Like I wrote like the first feature on Buddy Hield when he was at Oklahoma, and like, I love that kid. I think he's awesome. Like, I want to root for that kid more than I want to root for anyone in the NBA, basically. He's just so infectious. He's so fun. He's, a great dude, both on and off the floor. And I'm really happy that he actually figured some things out in Sacramento. Yeah.
And kind of that positivity around, who he is as a person and character and all that, there's some questionable choices the Kings have made and might still make around, who they keep and who they don't around character and all that. But at least for the young core that the Kings seem to be building around, they all kind of fit that mold where they're likable guys that you can get behind and root for both on and off the court, and positivity seems to be kind of what they're trying to emphasize around the guys they bring in.
So in that vein, let's talk about Scal, and I wouldn't say the opposite vein, but some people around the NBA aren't super excited about Willie Cauley-Stein. Which one of those guys are you more excited about as a Kings fan right now?
I'm really excited about both, but I would say I'm more excited about Scal just because what he showed towards the end of the season. We of course take everything with a grain of salt that time of year, but he showed that his ceiling is really limitless. I mean, he has unlimited potential of what he could become. Mm-hmm. He had just an absolute explosion of a game down the stretch against Phoenix, and Phoenix wasn't exactly like taking it easy on him. There was some the Kings and Suns played each other a couple times down the stretch, and even though both teams had incentive to not win, both teams played each other hard. It was kind of a weird rivalry thing, but I mean, Scal went off for like 31 points. Like a ton of it was in the fourth quarter. Just took over a game in a way that I haven't seen many guys in Sacramento do in a while, not named DeMarcus Cousins. And yeah, I mean, but I also am really excited about the way that Cauley-Stein has developed, especially once DeMarcus was gone and he was a little bit bigger part of the overall game plan. I mean, I think that, some people were down on him, but I think especially this next season, assuming he keeps on the track he was on towards the end of last year, I think some people are going to be coming around on him.
Yeah, let's talk about Willie real quick here. I was certainly down on him. I thought he was basically garbage through his first year and a half. I was saying
they should trade him while they still could before the trade deadline.
But he was much more useful later in the season. He was actually a guy that, could kind of defend a pick and roll. I mean, he still isn't as good at that as what his athleticism would indicate. You know what I mean? He still tends to either go too aggressive or not aggressive enough. He doesn't seem to have great feel in it yet, despite being as athletic as a guy that's 6'4".
What's funny is when he came into the league, he was drafted so highly based on his defense and the idea that he would be able to guard 1 through 4, and any offense you got from him was an afterthought. In the pros, his best aspects have been on the offensive end. He's showing impressive shooting, nice touch, nice moves around the rim, the scoring that we never expected from him, and the defense has been the struggle. It's been kind of weird to figure out.
Yeah, and that kind of scares me, to be honest, because I don't think his offense is ever going to be league average. Maybe for a center it can be league average, but I don't really trust him to necessarily be a 30-minute a game, 14-point, 10 rebound a game center.
Yeah, no, that's not his game at all. He's very much a rim runner type of guy, which is very useful in the modern NBA. Can operate well in the pick and roll, alley-oops, that type of thing. But he did show some decent touch on some mid-range shots, which more than anything is just nice for spacing and keeping defenses honest. And that was kind of the pleasant surprise, because when he was drafted, it was that question mark of, he could bring some good value on defense, which, again, he hasn't done. But on offense, is he going to be a guy that defenses can ignore and just double team your best player? And we even saw a lot of that early on, especially in his rookie year.
Yeah, and let's kind of move to Scal. Scal is doing basically what everyone who was a fan of him, including myself, I think I had him at number 9 on my draft board, going into draft day, and he falls all the way to 27, 29, something like
28.
that. 28,
I think it was.
Yeah, so the fact that he's doing basically what everyone was oh yeah, you put him in the NBA, you let him have all of the space in the mid-range, and you let him knock down those shots and just kind of dominate the weak side of the rim protection and grab rebounds. That's going to be super useful for him. He's going to be able to do all that. That's basically what he did. That seems a lot more translatable to me than what I have seen from Willie Cauley-Stein, even if Willie's athleticism would seem to portray more of an upside in terms of his defense.
Yeah, I would agree. And some of it, I think, it seems to me, and this is kind of just armchair, psychology, but it seems like Willie Cauley-Stein is a guy who needs to be involved in the game more. I think he's one of those guys that you get him involved early. He's a big part of the game plan. He's going to perform better. Whereas, with Cousins, he was definitely playing second fiddle, especially down low, and it just wasn't the right situation for him, I don't think. And I think where he's at now is much better. And
the combination space now.
Yeah, exactly. And the combination of skill sets between Cauley-Stein and Skal, I think, can complement each other very well going forward.
Yep.
Depending on how they develop.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Like, I would like one of them to maybe be like a little bit bigger and stronger, but they're both super young to the point where like maybe you can get there at some point. Maybe, this is an interesting way to build around, two modern NBA bigs in, as we said at the top, an NBA where fucking Kevin Durant and LeBron James are playing center right now.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. In the modern NBA, those two are almost prototypical of what you're looking for these days.
Is there anyone else that you're looking at on this roster as like a long-term piece? Like, we already talked about Papa G. I don't want to shit on Papa G anymore.
Yeah, no.
Like Malachi Richardson, Langston Galloway is a person who exists. Ben McLemore, they have the restricted free agency rights if they really want to use them. Like, is there any of those guys that stand out as, players that the Kings should keep, should continue to develop, should continue to grow, and eventually they could become maybe like a top 7 player on a Kings playoff team?
Yeah, I think Malachi Richardson definitely, if nothing else, has really nice like 6-man type of role potential. I mean, he was doing some really nice things before he unfortunately got hurt, which, it was just awful timing because the Kings brought him along slowly. They were developing him in Reno. They brought him up and were working in spot minutes, and then as he gained the coach's trust, he was playing more and more and was really doing some really nice things, had a really nice-looking shot, good comfort. I mean, he was just taking shots, contested shots, with the confidence of a guy who had been in the league for years.
That's never going to be a problem for him. I will assure you of that.
But he was making them. So I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see how he comes back from injury. Definitely a guy that Kings fans are still excited about, even though it's a little tempered now that you got Buddy Hield there. I think he's obviously a better prospect at the two. Yeah. And, we got to see how he comes back from injury. The other big guy that Kings fans are really excited about that we haven't talked about yet, whose rights came to the Kings in that trade.
I like the fact that you're bringing this guy up. Yeah. I think he is like genuinely going to be like a borderline starter for the Kings.
Yeah, I won't be surprised at all if he is starting some games and as Jaeger, toys with some lineups this year. He just had an amazing EuroLeague Finals.
He's one of the 5 best players not playing in the NBA right now. Almost unquestionably.
I mean, he's really one of those guys you think about if he was draft eligible this year. He's probably pretty comfortable top 15, I would say. Maybe.
I think he would pretty clearly be number 11 for me.
That's kind of where I'm thinking 10, 11, something like that.
Yeah, like maybe have him ahead of. Well, maybe I would have him like number 9. Like I would probably have him ahead of Frank Ntilikina, who I have at number 9. Like maybe Ntilikina has a little bit more upside, but like Bogdan, is already again at, what is he? I believe he's 23 years old. Like one of the 5 best players in Europe, and that is insane.
Yeah, so Kings fans have been keeping an eye on him since that trade, and we're really excited. Now, nothing's set in stone. He's not guaranteed to come over, but all the writing on the wall suggests he's going to come over this summer. He can, he won't be on the rookie scale anymore, so he can get a decent payday from the Kings. The Kings have the cap space, so it won't be an issue.
It's going to be like super expensive. Like it's going to be like $8 or $9 million a year, I think.
Yeah, they're going to end up paying him probably more than what he should get, but some of that's to cover his buyout, and just to convince him to come over. But I think it'll be worth it in the long run, especially since the Kings have more than enough cap space right now.
Yeah, no, and it's not going to be a problem. You give him 4 years, $36 million or something, and he flames out or whatever, you're just like, all right, whatever, I'll deal with it.
And if he does work out, you're paying him that during his prime. So
yeah, and like, to be honest, if he's as good as what he looks like in Europe right now, it's going to be a bargain at $9 million. Like, he is a really, really good European basketball player who can shoot threes. He can pass a little bit. Athletically, I think that, his athleticism might not play up as much as it does in Europe, in the NBA, obviously. But he's a super skilled player, and, he is a solid defender. Like, he does everything that you could hope for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that was, at the time, I really, really loved that trade for the Suns, or not for the Suns, I'm sorry, for the Kings. The Suns traded like number 8 for 13, 28, and Bogdan Bogdanovic, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, I thought Bogdan was probably the second best asset in that trade. And that includes like the number 8 pick in the trade. Like, I think that Bogdan might even be the best asset in that trade, given the fact that they used it on Marquise Chris, and Marquise Chris is not one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean,
go ahead.
I mean, Chris and Scal, we kind of kept an eye on the two of them as the year went along, and it's pretty close. I mean, I think you give Marquise Chris the edge at this point because he played a lot more, had a bigger role on the Suns. He looks like he'll probably be a decent player, but for how that trade could have gone down in historically Kings fashion, to end up with Scal, Bogdan, and then consider Papa G the throw-in, it seems very much like a win, and Kings fans are pretty happy with that trade, at least for now.
Yeah, and I think that they should be, to be honest. I mean, the thing that I always said about the Kings going into last offseason was they just needed quality, like, young quantity, which is like kind of a misnomer almost, because you think of like quality versus quantity being like on the different ends of the spectrum, right? But they just needed more trade assets, because like last summer, you look at what was on that roster. Was there anything that other teams were getting excited about in terms of like potentially trading for? To me, not really.
Apparently, Charlotte was really into Marco Bellinelli, but aside from that...
Right, but that was my thing. Like, you trade Marco Bellinelli, you pick up a young piece in Malachi Richardson that could eventually like be useful for you. You go out and you get a 3 asset for 1 deal in the trade for the number 8 overall pick. You go out and you do this DeMarcus Cousins trade where you get 2 for 1 essentially, or maybe even 3 for 1 whenever things kind of come to the end of it here. They've done a really good job of just having better young players and having more young players in a rebuilding organization. And I think that is incredibly important in terms of just getting more and more lottery tickets and trying to make things work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry, my dog is eating cat food right now, so I had to go on mute real quick and yell at her. So, yeah, this will be fun. Let's move on and talk about the NBA draft here. How much NBA draft watching have you done? Any NBA draft scouting yet?
So I am awful at paying attention to college basketball. So the vast majority of my scouting comes from like Draft Express videos and like YouTube highlights, and I do not claim at all to be an informed draft expert. We've got a guy on our staff at SCR who does that, and then I read the things that you and some of the other smarter folks put out there, and I use some of that to just kind of form my opinions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, honestly, no one likes watching college basketball. Like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we? Yeah. Why do I watch college basketball?
Because you're doing the Lord's work for us.
Is there anyone that stands out to you that you really want at number 5? The Kings have number 5. They have number 10. They have number 34, and I think that's it, right?
Yes, that's correct. Now, as a Kings fan, I am currently contractually obligated to say that we want De'Aaron Fox at 5. That's who the fan base has fallen in love with. It seems to be somewhat of a mutual love, which is a strange thing for Sacramento, and I think that 90% of why Kings fans want him is because he seems to like the idea of going to Sacramento. And we're just not used to being wanted, so it's nice. That being said, I'm kind of in the minority that while I'm perfectly fine if the Kings end up with Fox at 5, I feel like whoever of the top 5 falls to them at 5 is going to be great for Sacramento.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like, I actually do really like De'Aaron Fox in number 5, right? Like, he's a really good fit with Buddy Hield. Buddy Hield could kind of throw out all of the, floor spacing that is necessary for a guy like De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox could do some of the defensive work that Buddy Hield can't really do. And, it could actually really, really work well. I think that they would be awesome together.
Yeah, I think it's a really great fit, but I know a lot of Kings fans are kind of worried about, well, what if, one of the other teams falls in love with him and takes him before? And I'm like, well, then you end up with one of the other guys. It's fine. Like, I think it's such a good class, and especially the guys that are kind of the, quote unquote consensus top 5 right now. I think you end up with any of them, and the Kings are a better basketball team.
Yeah, and I guess, like, on some level, too, is there any aspect of you that is trying to, like, theorize out a way to fill, like, both of the major holes on this roster? Like, hoping that a point guard falls to 10 and taking a wing at 5, or, like, taking your point guard at 5 and, trying to get a wing at 10. Like, how much of that are you worried about, or are you just worried about getting the best player at 5?
I'm not smart enough at projecting how the draft will go and who I want and all of that. So, like, I think teams should hire me to tell them who I really like in the draft so they can avoid that person. Because, like, I was all in on getting Ben McLemore, Thomas Robinson. Like, I thought those guys were going to be amazing for the Kings, and, we know how that worked out. Like, so, I don't have the best track record, but yeah, obviously it'd be great if the Kings could end up with a 3 and a 1 in this draft. Like, let's say either Josh Jackson or Jason Tatum fall to the Kings at 5, and you take them, and then somehow either Dennis Smith or Frank and Ntilikina or one of those guards, the point guards, falls and somehow available at 10. That's ideal. But to me, it's more, hey, you take the best guy on the board at 5. And then you take the best guy on the board at 10, and you go forward from there. Because realistically, rosters are so fluid that it's okay if you don't exactly address the needs right up front. Like, you've got time to figure it out. It's not like the Kings have to fill a gap so they can make a title run.
Yeah, like, I have a mock draft coming out on Thursday, and I think I have what do I have there? I think I have. Actually, just let me pull it up and look. I have Jason Tatum and Malik Monk at 5 and 10. That's a really funky, like, combination,
sure.
Right?
You know what, though? If the Kings ended up with that, I'd be totally on board. I'd be thrilled. I'd be fine with that. Like,
do you know how goddamn fun that team would be in transition?
Yeah, like I know Monk is kind of that wild card right now where no one seems to be able to figure out where he's going to fall, and I think it has more to do with where the teams ended up draft order-wise as opposed to his talent. But, I mean, yeah, the Kings are loaded at 2 guard, and maybe not the best fit at 1, but if he's there at 10, you take him and you figure it out later.
Yeah, that's basically where I'm at. Like, if you, like, there are, like, 10 guys that I feel super confident are really good basketball players in this draft. Whoever falls at 10, just take them. Like, if it's Lowry Markkanen and you already have, Willie Cauley-Stein and Skal Labissière, just take Lowry and find a home for Papa G. Just make it work, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and when the Kings were before the lottery, when we were expecting to have 8 and 10, ending up with whoever was there at 8, and then a lot of people kind of thought that Markkanen would end up being the 10th guy. A lot of Kings fans were really down on that, and it's funny how the math kind of changed for us when it's 5 and 10, because you're expected to get a guy that is a much better fit for you or that you like a lot more at 5. And then, what you get at 10 is just kind of an extra on top.
Holy
and doesn't carry quite as much. Durant. Yeah, that shot is.
Sorry, go ahead, continue.
No, you're all right. And what you're hoping for is that occasionally Markkanen can hit a shot like that.
Yeah, what you're hoping for is that whenever you draft a guy that is, 6'11", 7 feet tall, that you get, these killer threes that basically end games in the NBA Finals. I can't believe Kevin Durant just grabbed that rebound, ripped it, and drilled that three after the way the Cavs have played this game.
Yeah. Oh my God.
That is unreal. Basketball's so dumb.
Why do we bother?
Why do we cover this? Like, the Warriors are going to win, like, 6 goddamn titles in a row. What does it matter what the Kings do?
New strategy for the Kings is to only draft players 19 and younger, so that they're in their primes when the Warriors are finally not a powerhouse.
Clearly, that's the dream here. Let's move on and talk about, is there anyone that you are interested in the later portion here? Like anyone that you hope falls to like number 34?
I could say that there was someone, but it would really just be me kind of picking and choosing whose other opinions I like.
What like player type is like? What player type is interesting to you there?
I mean, just because of the long-term need that's going to be there at guard and wing, I think if they double up and get, a second point guard or a second small forward with that spot, some sort of a wing contributor, I'm totally fine with any of that.
Yeah, like I think that basically makes sense to me. Like, if you're the Kings, just take the best player available, basically, and go. Kind of
like what you said. You're taking your lottery tickets. That's all you need to worry about.
Just take as many of them as you can, make it work, see what happens, and go from there. I mean that's what you got to do. Is there anything else with the Kings that you're excited about right now? Like, is there anything else that we need to like kind of hit on? Do you think?
I think the one thing to watch for is that I won't be surprised if the Kings enter draft day with an additional pick.
Really?
Yes.
They already have 3. Why would you need another one?
Well, and I say enter draft day. I don't think that they would walk away from draft day with the additional.
Yeah.
So what I see happening is, it's been made pretty clear that Portland is shopping their bad contracts and going to package one of their 3 first-rounders with it. Because they don't have the roster spots. They don't have the cap space. They have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned the Kings cap space. They've got between 55 and 62 million available for upcoming free agency. And let's be realistic, the Kings are not going to be signing a big-name free agent this summer. So
I was actually going to ask about that next. How stupid do we want to get?
Go for it. Whatever you got, I'm game.
Well, no, let's continue. Let's continue, talking about, what you were just saying. But like in a minute here, let's get real stupid and see what the Kings could do in free agency.
So I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Kings took on one of Portland's bad contracts or another team. I mean, it doesn't have to be Portland, but Portland's been out there publicly. Maybe the Kings take on the awful contract of Evan Turner. It makes it to where they don't have to force a rookie in as a starter at small forward anymore. Even if it's just for a year, just kind of having someone who's at least been around the league for more than a season or two.
Yeah.
And you pick up an extra first rounder, and then you use that plus the 10 to try to move up and secure something around the 6, 7, 8 range to where maybe they can get like a Jonathan Isaac instead of whoever's left at 10. Something like that would not shock me at all.
Yeah, I think that actually makes a lot of sense now that you say that. Like maybe trying to use 20, package it up. Like I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to package up in this draft because there is like kind of a very distinct tier, and I would imagine that teams are going to want to get their favorites within that top 10. But at the same time, like if you can offer 20 and you can maybe just kind of see if it gets you to where you want to get to, that's not a bad plan to me, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I won't be shocked at all if something like that comes to fruition. And honestly, if it doesn't, I'm going to be a little disappointed in the front office because if you're not doing deals like that, what else are you doing with all that cap space? I mean, yeah, you could try to pull the similar types of deals in, the trade deadline, try to get a pick for 2019 when the Kings won't have a first rounder. So there's things you could do, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it is what it is.
I expect them to be active. Let's just put it that way.
How active do you expect them to be in free agency? You kind of said like no one. I think that they're probably going to just have to go after like some sort of level of free agent.
they'll sign free agents. It's not that they won't get anyone. I'm just saying they're not going to get anyone noteworthy. They're probably going to do something similar to what they did with the deals of like Aaron Aflalo and Anthony Tolliver last year. Mm-hmm. They bring in some veteran guys who can help, kind of provide some balance to the locker room to where it's not just a room full of rookies and second-year players, but deals that maintain cap flexibility going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's smart. Maybe like overpay for a season and then toss on a non-guaranteed year at the end, like you said with the Aaron Aflalo deal. That's a deal that makes a lot of sense to me, and that's a deal that, ended up not necessarily working out for the Kings last year, but it's fine because it's not going to be, it's not going to hinder them long term, like, for instance, an Evan Turner contract would.
Yeah, and really those deals didn't end up hurting him too much. Anthony Tolliver was a really good influence on the rookies, especially down the stretch last season. He gets paid an extra, I think it's $1.5 million to, get to go be a free agent now and find a better place, and he's a solid player. Overpay a guy for a year and then let him be on his way to where he's not stuck in a bad situation for a long time. There's definitely going to be guys out there that are looking for that type of situation just because there's not a better long-term deal available for them right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Is there anything else we need to talk about? I don't really think there is, man. Like, this is going to be a really interesting, off season for the Kings, but it's not like a complicated one either. It's just continuing to stay the course, continuing to accumulate young assets, and just kind of going from there.
Yeah, it's really just about the Kings just can't Kings it up. They
just don't fuck it up. That's all it is.
Yeah, like, just go out there, make some solid draft picks, like, get one of them really right. Like, doesn't have to be both of them. Just get one of them really right. Do okay on the others. Use your cap space smartly. Like, that's it. You don't have to try to swing for the fences. You don't have to fix everything overnight. Just be smart.
Don't sign Rajon Rondo to a 3-year deal. Like, if he gets cut by the Bulls, like, don't sign Dwayne Wade to a 2-year deal with a player option on the end.
4-year deal for Michael Carter-Williams coming, Oh my
God, that would be terrifying. That is maybe the worst case scenario for Kings fans. Like, it's seriously, this is my serious voice. That is the worst case scenario for Kings fans.
I disagree. I got one worse. 4-year deal for Derrick Rose.
Yeah, that might be worse because that'd be way more expensive. Yeah, like 4 years. That'd be like a 4-year, like $70 million deal. No, that's way worse. Yeah, no, don't do that. Do not.
We can always do something worse.
Yeah, that is an atrocious idea. All right, Greg, tell the people where they can find you on the internet.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at GWIS, so GWISS, and I write at Sacktown Royalty, and then we've got the Sacktown Royalty Show, which should have new episodes coming back again soon. We've kind of fell off for a little while, but we're going to be coming back, and that's iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Greg does a great job over there. You should absolutely follow all of that work over at Sacktown Royalty. One of my favorite people to follow on the internet because he yells about politics like I do. So that's always fun.
That'll get the people to follow me. He talks politics.
Hey, if they deal with me, I feel like they'll deal with you. That's been Greg Wissinger from over at Sacktown Royalty. We'll be back in a minute to talk with Erik Gunderson from over on Locked On Blazers about the Portland Trail Blazers, who also have a really interesting draft-laden discussion for their offseason upcoming. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks.
All right, now we are here with Erik Gunderson from over at, where are you, Erik, right now? Go ahead and give the intro.
Oh, hey, I'm in Portland. I host a podcast that during the season we do a lot, usually 5 times a week. Locked On Blazers, it's called. We're about twice a week right now, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I also write for the AP and Real GM as well. I used to be the beat writer at the Vancouver Columbian for 3 years.
Yeah, quite a lot of good background here on the Portland Trail Blazers, who we are going to talk about in this show. I kind of want to get your impression of what happened this year with the Blazers. I'll set the table here real quick for my listeners. 41-41 record, basically right in line with what was expected of them in terms of win-loss based on their, net rating. Offensive rating was 110.3. Defensive rating was 110.8. So, slightly outscored over the course of the year, but not necessarily a crazy big deal. This was kind of the tale of two seasons, right? Because on some level, the team changed after Jusuf Nurkic was acquired, right? Like, this was a team that was genuinely really struggling before the Mason Plumlee-Jusuf Nurkic trade. And then afterward, things really kind of seemed to click into place. And I think part of that was probably schedule-based in some way because, they started to get hit with like your Orlandos, your Brooklyns, your Phillies, your Phoenixes, like all in a row kind of. You had a Denver game, you had another Phoenix game, Minnesota's an easier opponent. Like there were a lot of games like that down the stretch that I think really helped them. And they also had an inordinate number of home games late in the season. And obviously anyone who's ever been to the Moda Center will tell you that that place rocks whenever the team is really good. And this team is really talented and there's reason to be excited about it. However, it did seem like the Nurkic trade did kick something into effect, I think.
It did. I totally agree with you that last season was the tale of two seasons. There were such high expectations, I think, locally, maybe not so much nationally, because they spent so much money to bring back a lot of these guys. And you look at their payroll and you think, okay, well, these guys should produce. And before the season starts, Damian Lillard's telling J.A. Donde, he wants to go to the Western Conference Finals. And so people start to get excited, but then it just seemed like, things were stale. I think with Plumlee in the middle, the fact that he could not score really, and he was a better scorer this year, but he was just not really that much of a threat. And he also just wasn't good enough defensively to not be that much of a threat on the offensive end. And it was not an easy season. I think there was a lot of frustration internally, as good as they could put a face on it. I think behind the scenes there was some unhappiness, with just losing. That's what happens when you lose. You don't get happy. And I think the Plumlee trade for a moment was a little jarring for Lillard. I mean, Lillard even said that, he was going to miss him.
Mason was a huge part of their just locker room culture,
Yeah, and also I just think Dame really valued his toughness late in games and his composure late in games. Like a lot of times when Dame would get in trouble late in the fourth quarter, the guy he throws the ball to get it back would be Plumlee. And so, he really trusted him. They went through some wars together in the playoffs and stuff. So he really missed, he was really bummed about it. But then, as you mentioned, schedule kind of breaks right. And Nurkic comes back. And they did have a lot of home games, but I will say they also had some really, in my eyes, pretty shocking wins on the road at times during that stretch as well. They beat San Antonio, they beat Atlanta, they beat Miami, and it was kind of in Nurkic, I do think that there is something there. I don't necessarily think that they're going to be a team that's going to knock off Golden State or anything like that, but I think they could be a decent playoff team for a couple of years to come, just because I think they finally found a center, which they even after Aldridge left, I think they were always looking for that next pillar in the middle to hold it down. And Plumlee did a nice job. He was really great, but he wasn't really good enough to be that guy for this team, I think. And plus, he was a free agent, so it just kind of was bad timing too.
So before I get into this idea of was this season a little bit of a disappointment, I do kind of want to talk briefly about, do you think that last season set up unrealistic expectations given on the talent level? Because for people who remember coming into last year, I think that this, Trailblazers team I expected them to be one of the 10 worst teams in the NBA last year, and then they exceed everyone's expectations, win like 45 games, get to the second round. And then they decide to re-sign all of their free agents to exorbitantly high contracts. They bring in Evan Turner at an exceedingly high number, we will say. And from there, they have to kind of decide, do we want to push in? Do we want to make this our roster of the future? And they ultimately decided to do so. So given that, do you think that this season is going to be seen as a disappointment for the organization? And then on top of that, well, let's start there, and then we'll get into how they can retool.
Well, I think if you're in the organization, you can kind of you can talk yourself into, yes, it was probably a mistake to pay Evan Turner and all that, but also within the organization, you can also say, hey, we had the youngest team in the playoffs. We are still extremely young, even though they are young and paid. You can convince yourself, hey, some of the guys we have may be enticing to other teams, and maybe it wouldn't cost too much to unload some of those guys, or maybe some teams would be willing to give something up. Who knows? But maybe you can convince yourself that your guys have more value than they showed maybe this year, because they did get those contracts, and some of them, and almost all of them played the open market for a brief time and tried to get other deals. So I think maybe that's what you can tell yourself, but I think also, they spent so much money. They're going to be in the tax next year, and I think it would have been a complete disaster had Nurkic not happened. It would have been extremely dire, I think, if they didn't find another guy out of all of this spending, all of this money they spent. And it wasn't even part of the money that they spent, but they needed to find someone who you can say, okay, well, he's here and he's going to be here next to Dame and CJ, because I think that's been the search for a while.
So before we get into the ancillary players here, I kind of want to ask you about the Dame and CJ combination, right? How do you feel about that being a winning strategy long term? Because I absolutely would not trade either of them this summer, but I think that it's worth noting that there are some long-term fit concerns given the fact that neither of them are good defensively. They both do similar things offensively, realistically. It's great to have as much skill and ball handling on the floor as you can have, but for me, you also need one of those guys to be a great defender, and I worry that neither of them is going to get to that point. Do you kind of have some concerns about building this organization around CJ and Dame as your two centerpieces long term?
I have concerns about it. I think I definitely do, because, like you said, remains to be seen whether one of them can really be a great defender. I think McCollum is a very smart defender. If not, he's just limited, I think, in a lot by how tall he is. And he's the same size as Dame. But, one of the things that about CJ and Dame, and I actually wrote about this for Real GM recently, is that their success last year and whatever they've had this year, which they both had career years, is also kind of part of a symbiotic relationship. They play off of each other very well, both on the court and off the court. They work out together. They work out with the same coach. I do wonder what their offensive production would be if they got rid of one of them for another guy who might be a better defender. And in the times that we have seen, recently it's just usually been we've seen CJ by himself, more so than Dame by himself, but they just don't score enough without those two guys, and they're still not good enough defensively to win, really, in my opinion. And I don't know what realistically contending means anymore in the West with regards to Golden State. And I kind of, from Portland's perspective, I kind of look at Houston, because Portland regressed offensively this year. And I think with Nurkic, maybe a full season, maybe they can add another offensive player or something. But I feel like they've really got to own the offensive end of the floor, period, first, because they're the closest at being really, really good at that. And I think they could be, average to just below average on defense. And I think that that's a realistic expectation for this team with CJ and Dame. And I would just like to see that because I just don't know what realistically contending means. And I don't know who they could trade CJ for that's really going to make them that much better, because I feel like then it just presents you with different problems.
Right. No, I think that that's ultimately why I think, I would continue with the status quo with those two for now and just kind of continue to see where this thing goes, especially given the fact that they're both signed for 4 more seasons. You don't need to make this call now. You know what I mean? Like, you can continue this on and just see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail right on the head. There's absolutely no rush to break those two up right now because you have 4 years left on their deals, and you could probably go 2 more years of this and still convince a team that they can, be like, okay, we'll get 2 years of one of these guys if it really doesn't, if it flames out or whatever.
Yep, absolutely. So let's move on to the rest of the roster, which I feel like other than Nurkic, basically everything should be on the table, right? Like there is not a guy on this roster that I look at beyond Yusuf Nurkic and go, okay, they need that guy. Maybe Al-Farouq Aminu, just given his importance defensively, but I kind of felt like he took a little bit of a step back there this year too.
Well, he had the one thing about Aminu that I didn't really think about until he said it after the season was he's actually never been hurt, like ever. And this was the first year that he's been hurt. And
it's kind of incredible.
Yeah, and especially for a guy that plays such good defense like he does, he's always grinding out there on the defensive end. And yeah, he had a really weird, I think it was like a calf injury for most of the season, if I recall. And he missed about 20 games and 21 games to be exact. And that really hurt the Blazers. And I think they kind of played around with his role, I think, a lot because he wasn't shooting the ball well, which I was worried that he may not shoot the ball as well as he did last year because his shooting last year was completely it looked like an outlier compared to his other seasons, and it turned out that was kind of right, but he kind of brought it way back up. He really finished the season strong, shooting the 3 well after shooting like 20% earlier in the season. But I think he'll be back, and I think he'll be okay, just so long as he doesn't get hurt. I agree with you. I think Aminu, that's why they were good last year.
He was a big reason why.
Yeah, exactly. They obviously CJ and Dame and Plumlee was good as well. Crabbe had a better year, but Aminu played, I think, the most minutes, or at least was playing up there with the most minutes, and was such a huge part of all their best lineups. Just was a huge key, and he shot 36% from 3, which he had not before, and it looked like, okay, well, maybe he just needed the role to shoot that, and this year he really took a step back, and it looked like he was hesitant. It looked like to me, one of the things he said is that he worked on his ball handling, and to me it looked like he was more intent on showing his ball handling than shooting the ball, and maybe that was a confidence thing, I'm not sure, but I would like to see him shoot the ball with more confidence next year.
Yeah, to me, this team doesn't need more ball handling or offensive creation, right? Like, when you have Damian Lillard, you have CJ McCollum, and even to a lesser extent, Yusuf Nurkic can create his own shot in the post. You don't really need any more of that. Like, even Mo Harkless can slash in a straight line and get to the rim. They need a 3-and-D type of guy to me. Like, would you say that to you is their biggest, kind of hole that they need to fill? They need like a low usage 3-and-D guy who can really, get after the opposing team's best perimeter player.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And Aminu was that guy last year. He was, he started, he was huge for them and was really solid. And I think Crabbe also too. They had a lot of guys last year that shot the 3 well and played decent defense. Gerald Henderson too. He played really good defense off the bench and actually shot surprisingly well from 3 for his career. And yeah, I think that was just missing. I just think, they had a lot of guys that did one or the other at a given time, but no one could really consistently give them both. I think Harkless was the best at that this year for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he probably was. Like, Alan Crabbe hit 45% of his threes, but the defense took a step back. Maurice Harkless, at least, he provides resistance defensively. Like, I don't think he's a plus defender, but he's a two-way player in that he at least gives effort defensively, and you can count on him to be in the right spot, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement, and I think the skill you mentioned earlier about him cutting off the ball and darting in a straight line to the basket is a really valuable skill for a team that has creators like Dame, CJ, Nurkic, that can pass the ball. And so, he was really, really good at that. Shot the three surprisingly well, and he has had other seasons where he shot the three well, but he didn't shoot it well last year. So you kind of have to wait and see whether he can shoot it well again. But he's very young, and I think his shot looks like a decent shot mechanically. Like, there's not a lot of like movement or anything. There's no because like Aminu shoots, but he has like a hitch kind of when he releases. And Harkless is like very limited motion, just kind of quick shot, and his confidence was totally shot in playoffs. I mean, Draymond took him completely out of that, but I really do think that he will be a good player to build around, or if they need to move someone. And I think he's a player that can actually attract a lot more interest in a trade around the league, because he has those skills. He could be a good 3-and-D guy, and he had a really great season for them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. All right, I'm going to throw you a fake trade that I've been touting on this podcast for a while. One of Allen Crabbe or Evan Turner. Obviously, you try and get rid of Turner first. If they wouldn't accept, you'd have to move up to Crabbe. And pick number 20 or 26, one of the two, for Wes Matthews in Dallas. Bring Wes Matthews back to Portland. He can defend the opposing team's best player. He can, knock down shots from the perimeter. He's obviously good at attacking closeouts. Does a lot of really, important stuff for a winning team, in my opinion. What would you think of a deal like that?
I mean, Matthews is probably making, after the trade kicker, wouldn't Matthews be making Crabbe money?
Yeah,
they're very comparable salaries.
I'm pretty sure you would be like right in the range of it being equal salaries with both Allen Crabbe and Evan Turner.
Right, and Portland has enough extra salaries as well to attach. They can put Festus on there if they need to or whatever.
And it's the same with Dallas, yeah.
Right, and so I think that would be a really solid trade because the Blazers, none of the guys that I think Turner was actually, this is my theory on Turner, that he's a better player for the postseason than he is a player for the regular season. Because I think just he can handle the ball and teams really take Dame and CJ out of it. Like the Warriors, I thought against the Warriors, Turner was not bad. I just really think they missed having Nurkic. And they could have been maybe they would have been a little bit better, more competitive. I don't know. But that was the only postseason we saw was against the Warriors. That's all we have to go off of. But anyway, I think that Wesley is more of just Wes is just more of a gamer, and I feel like they miss that mentality outside of Dame and CJ. They need someone that can kind of act on that, because Dame and CJ are going to do what they do, but they can't really be physical and bring. I mean, they can, but they're not going to enforce anything. I think
they need a motherfucker defensively on the perimeter who will get up in some guy's grill and cause problems.
Yes, they absolutely they need that dog, and that's what Wesley is like, and I would be for that, and to get because the problem with all of the wings that they had this year is you have so many that you have none, and it was just kind of this rotate. It was like a 2-quarterback system. Like they just did not find a wing at out Harkless, but even he had some struggles, and in the postseason was awful. So he didn't even have there was just nothing you could really count on all season. And so I think you can definitely count on Wes Matthews now that he looks healthy. He shot the 3 well last year, as you mentioned. I would like to see his 2-point field goal percentage be a little bit better, but and I think maybe that's just going to come back as he continues to because the Achilles injury is a killer, and so for most guys, and I think the further away he gets from that, probably the better he will be, just because what we know about how Matthews takes care of his body, how Matthews really works hard. I could be into that trade because he just seems like a guy that would be more ready for the moment than any of these guys.
Yeah, and I feel like that makes sense for Dallas too, like especially if you're talking about like trading Allen Crabbe, because Crabbe is still what I believe 24, 25, something in that range. Would fit in well with a rebuilding team in terms of timeline. And I think you would be adding one extra year of salary, but that would be okay. Obviously depending on if Crabbe picks up what is almost assuredly going to be an easy $18.5 million player option pickup in the fourth year of that deal, which is in 2019, 2020. And then they obviously get the extra pick that Portland doesn't really need. And we'll kind of transition into the draft now. What are the odds that you think Portland uses all three of these picks? I feel like they are incredibly low.
Yeah, I would agree with. I would say 5%.
Yeah, like in some sort of trade. Like even if they trade one of these picks to move like into next year's draft or something, like I feel like it's incredibly low odds that they would use all of these picks.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I just there's no way also that they would be bringing on so much extra salary that they don't really need. I think really these picks are a way to entice teams to give up someone like a Wes Matthews or a more veteran player or shed salary in some way. I think some of their guys, I think Crabbe is good enough to warrant. He's not going to just be a salary dump. Crabbe is good. He's a good shooter. I think he could be, like you said, better in a high usage role. But I just don't think they're going to – I think they're going to use those picks to attach to other things to make a trade happen. I agree with you that it's just with where they are too. They need guys that can play now. They're in the midst of their core's moment. And so I think they don't really – and they already have a bunch of young guys.
Well, like the other question is too, like, will they use picks to like attach to salary to dump one off? Like I thought that like Evan Turner and number 20 for like Lance Thomas or something would make a modicum of sense given the fact that, the Knicks are known to like Evan Turner since Phil Jackson is there and thinks he'd be a really good fit in the triangle. The Knicks could obviously use another draft pick. And then, this saves Portland, probably $15 million by the time tax is out of it to get rid of Evan Turner's contract and, cut that number by $10 million whenever you take into account what Lance Thomas is making. Like, I feel like that's the kind of move that would make sense for, both parties. Basically, the Knicks buying Evan Turner for $10 million and buying a pick for $10 million.
Yeah, I think that works out. And if you can, if they really believe that, and it was hard this year for Turner to really have success. He didn't, it's one of
he's
the
a tough guy to fit into a roster. Like, I feel like it's always going to take him, at least 1 year to really like get into a spot where he feels good.
Yeah. And also too, I wish we could have I wish he would have been healthy or would have had more time to play with Nurkic. I would have liked to see them run like a pick and roll together. I think that could have been okay. And, it's not that obviously it would be great it feels like, especially if they keep Crabbe, it feels like Turner and Crabbe don't really work that well together, or Turner because, I think, if I'm looking at the numbers, I did the review on my podcast, and, Crabbe's usage rate went down a couple of points, and his mid-range shots, he took way less of those, and he was really solid in the mid-range the year before. And I think, when he's playing together with Turner, you're like, oh, wait, well, who's in the mid-range when Crabbe's on the court? And it's Turner. Mm-hmm. And so, I think if they're going to get rid of Crabbe, I think Crabbe is the guy that could get you the most. But I think Turner, maybe if Crabbe isn't there and they just have someone that maybe doesn't need the ball as much in that spot, that maybe Turner could be successful here just with a little bit more time.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think ET's a guy that just needs some time, but maybe that's just the Ohio State, graduate in me. Is there any NBA draft prospect that you're looking at and thinking is really interesting? Like, are you interested in some sort of point guard to kind of take over for both CJ and Dame whenever they go to the bench? Are you interested in, wings? Are you interested in bigs? What kind of, what kind of process do you think that the Blazers should be undertaking here? Or should they just be kind of casting a wide net?
I think they should definitely look for talent first. If someone slips, that unsuspectedly slips, I think, a lot of people say, Zach Collins is a guy just to have as a backup big because Ed Davis is a free agent. They have Myers Leonard as well.
He's really useful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he had a really bad season last year, and so I would not be surprised if they look to move him and get him into change of scenery or something like that. And also, too, I kind of what along the lines of what you mentioned earlier, the Blazers don't necessarily need a ton of extra offensive talent, provided that Dame and CJ are still there and Nurkic is as good, and maybe they get one other guy. But I think at their big man spots, they really just need guys that can hit the glass and protect the rim. And if Collins seems like that kind of guy, I think he would be interesting. But I really think actually, the big man weakness spots we've talked about, but I like what Noah Vonleh did last year with Nurkic especially. I think they really worked well together, and then he got some confidence playing backup center that I liked. So really, I think with all the money that they have committed to wings and stuff like that, I really think they need like a 3-4 type wing that can back up Aminu or, step into a role that maybe Harkless had if they have to move Harkless. A guy that can just give them more versatility on the wing and just be kind of a stronger defender, I think. Someone that they can really count on as a 3-and-D guy, or at least maybe a D guy that can develop the 3 as he grows into the league. I think, backup big and then 3-4 wing, I think are really important. Obviously, you'd love a wing that could be a playmaker and a good defender and a good shooter, but that's a lot to ask.
Yeah, I mean, basically you're asking for OG Anunoby to fall to 15. And, I think that if Anunoby fell to 15, that would make a lot of sense for Portland. A really good defensive player. He's going to be low usage offensively. You could fit him next to Yusuf Nurkic at the 4. You could fit him maybe at the 3 with a Maurice Harkless and kind of see where that thing goes. You bring up Zach Collins. I think if Collins falls to 15, it's just too much talent there, I guess, for me to pass on. Like, I'd just be like, okay, just, take them and figure out what to do then. We're going to try and move Myers Leonard then. We're going to try and move, maybe Noah Vonleh or, let Noah Vonleh test restricted free agency next summer and just kind of see where to go from there. Is there any, late round prospects that you've seen that interest you for the Blazers?
I'm kind of into Terrence Ferguson, and but the other guy that I'm really, really into is Semi Ojeleye.
Yes.
I didn't see much of him. I saw him in the conference tournament that they played SMU, and then I also watched him play against USC, and I was really intrigued. And you look at all his numbers. He shot the 3 well. He rebounded. He and does a lot of stuff. And I wonder maybe he could be a 3-4 type player. Maybe there's a little bit of with how big he is. He gives me PJ Tucker vibes, and he's a lefty, right?
He's a righty, but he is PJ Tucker-y, that 3-4 combo-y big guy that isn't super tall or anything like that, just physical and strong.
I feel like the Blazers could definitely use some more strength. And because they're not going to out tall teams, I don't think, with Dame and CJ, but if they could just get rebounds and just be a little bit sturdier defensively, I think that would go a long way because they just really struggled with that last year. And I think, Ojeleye is an interesting later first round prospect for me. And then that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, no, I like that idea. I like the idea of Jordan Bell next to Yusuf Nurkic because I think he would cover up for a lot of Yusuf Nurkic's weaknesses because Bell's really good at rotating over from the weak side to block shots, incredibly mobile defensively, to me, that's kind of the perfect fit for what the Blazers are hopefully looking for. You wish that Bell could shoot a little bit, but being up there, in Oregon, I'm sure that they've gotten a chance to really scout him. And I'm sure they're seeing the same things that like everyone else is, right? That, this kid is ready to step into the NBA defensively from day one and be an impact player. And you can't say that about more than 2 rookies every year.
Right. And then he was phenomenal. I'm an Oregon grad, so obviously I'd be totally down to have Jordan Bell on the team. And he was phenomenal in the tournament. Just was so good also down the stretch after they lost Boucher. He really stepped up and was really solid, was even better, finishing around the basket. Mm-hmm. And that's what, the Blazers, they could use him. Obviously, it'd be great if he could be like a Serge Ibaka type where he could protect the rim and shoot threes. But I really do think, too, one of the things that gets overlooked on this team is, and is just they need more presence around the rim. They just need some buckets around the rim. I think Vonleh gave them that a little bit more this year. But Bell is so athletic, I think he could also have success with that, just dedicating himself to just, okay, I'm going to grab rebounds, block shots, and I'm going to dunk the ball on occasion. And I think that would be a big help just because of how that would attract the defense in. And I feel like the Blazers, Damon CJ can get there, and Nurkic was better at it, but I really think they could use more of that, just those breakdowns in the defense. And I think a lot of that happens because people get to the rim, and I think Bell could be a good guy to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that that would be a really nice fit. Erik, is there anything you want to plug before you get out of here? We're going to call this one at right around 30 to 35 minutes.
Just check out Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, everywhere you get a podcast. We're there, Locked On Blazers. I'm the host. I have lots of guests doing lots of draft coverage. We just did our season in review. So definitely come check it out. It's usually me, but I also have a rotating crew. Sam, I got to get you on.
Yeah, by all means, anytime.
And yeah, so we're doing a lot of draft stuff, and obviously we're doing stuff all year. We're at twice a week right now, so definitely check it out for Blazers talk at least twice a week.
Erik, thank you for coming on. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. You can subscribe to this show on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Android, anywhere that you can get podcasts. We're up on there right now. This has been the Friday podcast. On Monday, we're going to have some more team-based previews, maybe a breakdown of an NBA Finals that might be over at that point. I'm not sure. I'm recording this on Wednesday before the Game 3, so maybe this will sound really stupid, even by tomorrow. But, we'll see if this thing's going to be done. But, thanks to Erik for coming on. Thanks to Greg for coming on before to talk about the Sacramento Kings. And until next time, we will talk soon. Bye.